I'm your host, Dino Watt, and get ready to be inspired as you learn exactly how to own your role. And welcome once again, everybody, to the Own Your Role podcast. Happy to have you here. I'm your host, Dino Watt, and thank you again for everybody who has liked and subscribed and got that little notification bell, especially on YouTube, that we are releasing another show. Today is a show where we get to talk a little bit about finances, about best laid plans that don't always come to fruition, and how do we pivot when we need to pivot. So before we get into that show, again, I just want to thank everybody for spreading the word about the podcast and letting people know about it. I am heading out to one of the largest conferences in the country for the orthodontic industry this weekend at the time of this recording. And every time I go to one of these conferences, I get people who come up and say the episode that they listened to most recently or how much they appreciate it. And I appreciate you appreciating it. So thank you again for doing so and being part of the On Your Roll podcast. Our guest today is Greg Martin, who's going to talk to us about his journey as an investment banker and then making some other plans. And then maybe God or COVID laughed a little bit at him. And then he turned into more opportunity for him. He also has a podcast of his own that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But before we do any of that, thank you, Greg, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here to talk about your journey, which is something that we focus a lot on the show. As we start every episode, I believe stories are the thing that connects all of us. So tell us a little bit about your story and your background. Where do you come from? And why did you choose the career that you did?
Yeah, so I'm born and raised in the Toronto area, Canada. And coming out of and going to university, I was reasonably good at school and stuff, but didn't know what I wanted to do. Thought I would be accounting and stumbled upon this world of finance and really liked it. Though interestingly, I come from a line of entrepreneurs, grandfather, dad, I have uncles and lots of people in that world. And I wanted to do that. Like I've always wanted to do that and really identified a lot with some of what they have had. I grew up with that influence for sure, but I didn't really have any idea. I felt like as a young person coming out of university, having no idea what I was doing. And so I needed a job with direction and someone to tell me what to do. And I needed to learn. And so I went into this career of investment banking, which is a little bit crazy at times because I was just working 80, 100-hour weeks at times. Wow. It was a pretty intense career, but it was that idea, hey, I'm just going to learn. And I told myself I'll do it for 2 or 3 years and then go do something else. It's a great experience. You learn a lot. And I hit the 10-year mark and had a bit of a crisis of what am I doing here? Is this the rest of my life? Am I only going to be, I don't know, in this singular career? Maybe it is, I don't know. Should I go and do something else? And in amongst that, I ended up, I had founded and gotten involved in a food business. And so I did that. And the pandemic, like you mentioned, kind of had made that, I think, very challenging at a certain point, and so brought me back to my career now, which has been sort of investment banking. And so, yeah, I definitely resonate with some of those ideas of, hey, you've got this business and you're thinking about, hey, what's more, what's out there? And so that's a lot of what I spend my time thinking about and talking to others about.
Nice. Well, okay, so you went from investment banking, and when you talk about that, you're talking more, did you help smaller businesses get capital? Were you looking at big tech stuff? What was your focus there?
I was focused on M&A at the beginning of my career, and actually still am today, but I was originally working with a lot of public companies. So one public company trying to buy another, and it's a little bit crazy at times. And even this concept of a hostile takeover, I've been involved in a few of those as an advisor, and they're very they're fun and intense, but you can't have a separate social life. But today I work with a lot more founders, entrepreneurs when their time has come to exit their business, retire, whatever, and that's a lot of what I'm working with. The types of businesses I work with today.
So do you help them when they're ready to exit, whatever it is, to find the right buyers, partners, capital? What are you looking for?
Yeah, how to position the business properly, how to do it, how to actually exit, and then ultimately how to find that good buyer who is sometimes, a lot of times it's value. You're trying to figure out, hey, who's actually going to sort of pay me for the business, but also in many cases it's you're continuing on in the business for a certain period of time, or maybe you aren't, but your kids or the people you've worked with for many, many years and your people in your community potentially. And so it is important what happens to that business. And so we help manage a lot of that. It's something that as a business owner, you rarely do. You're not selling your business too often. And so having, that's kind of all I do now.
Well, that's pretty apropos for a lot of I know the listeners of this show. We have a lot of people who are looking at corporate opportunities or buyout type situations where there will
Yeah.
be venture capital coming in. What do you feel? And I'm gonna pick your brain on this one a little bit for now before we pivot to a couple other questions I had. But what do you feel is one of the biggest mistakes that people do make when it comes to getting ready to get ready to sell or partner?
I would say that they aren't necessarily prepared for the process and sort of what's actually going to happen because there's a lot to it. And what I would say and the advice I give to a lot of people who have their businesses is you can't start too early because just even having conversations, you don't actually have to sell your business, but have a few conversations about it. What tends to happen is founders tend to leave it to the last minute. And just because it's an awkward thing to talk about, it's an awkward thing you don't want to start telling everyone in your company. You don't want to start telling your competitors, hey, I'm going to retire and I'm going to leave and my business will be no more. But you kind of need to. You need to figure out a way to do that with people you trust, with some sort of way, and start to get to think, hey, how am I going to do it? Because one, there's a huge value benefit. I think if you can organize yourself properly, get thinking that way, it can actually really help that transition. And I think two, it's finding that right like partner can actually take a lot longer than you think.
When people don't prepare and they come in that last minute, I've heard this before. You can confirm or deny this, but it definitely seems like people have a false sense of how long or
Yep.
short it might take for this actual process to happen. They're thinking, "Hey, summer's coming. Maybe I'll retire now so I can have my whole summer," and
Right.
it's going to be a bit longer of the process than that.
You can do that, but it's just it may feel like a fire sale where the person who's buying your business is just trying to buy it because they know you want to go on vacation
So
soon,
motivated.
and that's the wrong reason, right? You really want to play it out, and it is interesting. Like there are lots of opportunities to be involved and to take a step back where you're effectively selling your business. You're definitely thinking about, hey, I'm selling it, but I'm staying involved in some way or another. And with some founders, that can actually be, I mean, it's incredibly nerve wracking because you've been the boss forever and now you're going to let someone else effectively be the boss. But I would actually say that it can be kind of liberating because some of the problems are not your problems anymore. They're someone else's. You've done you've done your thing, but you still have a ton of experience and advice to be able to offer. And it actually is an interesting transitional thing to think about is, hey, could I take a step back but not completely remove myself from the business? Because it also can be a stark change where all of a sudden you were living and breathing this business and you now don't have it anymore and you're not sure even what to think about or what to do with your life. So
Yeah.
that can be surprising as well.
Now, it sounds like you deal primarily, obviously, with the front end of that, but I bet you've seen and or heard some really interesting stories of that we just talked about, of the back end of like, oh, this wasn't all that I thought it was going to be, or the little shock, was that shock and awe around
Yeah.
what is actually happening, and that you don't have your business anymore.
Yeah, I interviewed a guy on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, and his was exactly that. He sold his business because the pandemic similarly had sort of really changed things a little bit, and made him realize. And he said it took him a year to actually figure out what he was doing because he sold it pretty quickly, and after that he didn't know what he wanted to do or what he was doing. It was just sort of this I wake up in the morning and I don't have that like direction, that purpose, what I'm doing. And so it took him a while, and that's actually what people told him. He had gotten that advice that it might take you many months to actually figure out what you want to do and who you want to be after you retire, initially retire. And he said he was like, I was shocked, but it actually took me a year.
I can
So
totally imagine that, because even when you say that, waking up in the morning and not having direction as an entrepreneur, like you have the list of 30 things that have to get done today or people you got to reach out to in your brain. And I can't even imagine. I guess the closest thing would be like being on vacation, I guess, but to
yeah,
wake up and be like, I don't have to do a thing today. That would
no,
be pretty intense.
and there's a honeymoon. There's definitely the honeymoon where it's
Yeah,
really
sure.
nice, but it doesn't last.
Yeah. Just like all honeymoons, right? That's
Yeah.
right. Okay, so you take this. I'll probably delve into that a little bit more with some of your favorite stories and examples and stuff. But you decided to move into a completely different silo, which is food, or
Yeah.
maybe it's not as different as I think it is. What was that thinking, and why was that created in your head to do that?
Yeah, I think what happened to me was a little bit, I got kind of bored, kind of complacent, and my mind just started to wander a lot
Yeah,
especially when I had the chance or the opportunity to do it at my job with what I was doing. And
sure.
I had actually just partnered with, I found some interesting people in that world. I had done a lot of work in the food industry from my perspective. So at least I felt like I brought some of that. And I was just fascinated by the industry and my justification for getting involved in the food industry, though everyone says, hey, it's really a tough industry, it's low
Yeah, that's all
margin,
you
it's
hear. Yeah,
challenging.
sure.
My rationale for it was, hey, worst case scenario, I learn a lot, I fail and I learn a lot about an industry that I like. And so I will at least enjoy that. And that was part of the rationale. And originally when I got involved in the business, I was more of an investor, like a fairly active one, but I was still working. And so it was, and at a certain point though, then I did decide, hey, I can't actually get enough out of this and realize on this, call it investment, enough until I actually get involved in the business day to day, which I ended up doing for 2 years.
Wow. So then after getting involved, then a pandemic comes along and shuts so much stuff down. And I don't know if there is a good comparison on different countries, but I know, Canada was pretty strict on a lot of stuff too. So you didn't have a lot of
Yeah.
places. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very much like we were on our toes, and the challenge was our business. We were primarily targeting offices, so it was office lunches and
Oh, wow.
office catering was a big part of what we did.
Oh,
So as
no.
soon as the pandemic hit, I knew that had changed our business forever. Like it wasn't going to come back, and frankly, it hasn't even come back yet to the same degree. But what was challenging was trying to figure out, okay, well, what do we do now? Like, people need food, but how? And it was just we weren't set up for what we had to do. We tried, but it was very challenging.
Yeah, because it's not like you didn't have offices who are like, well, we're just eating in, so you got to cater to us.
Yeah,
Like it's not like you could
the
Uber
market
Eats it
changed.
or Great Ghost Kitchens or anything like that.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned something a moment ago. I think it's really important as an entrepreneur, and I think many people can relate to it. You said you feel like you were kind of getting bored, and so you look for something else. I have a great friend years ago to talk about how so often when we as entrepreneurs get distracted or go to look open, and it's because we're bored with what we're doing and not and taking kind of our eyes off the prize for a second, and then trying to find something else that might be faster, easy, better. What are you doing now that you've gone through that experience and now you're back in the world? And I say back, but you're reigniting, I guess, in the world again of venture capital. What are you doing to stave off the boredness or the boredom? Is it the podcast?
No, actually, it's not.
Oh, okay.
It's that helps, sure, but I would also say it's a bit of a hobby. I think one of the things I realized in going through all this is that you need to one experiment. You need to see what you want to do, what you're good at. I think I didn't. I reached a plateau where I didn't know what my goal was within the industry that I was in. And I think that was the challenge.
Wow.
And what
Good
happened to
insight.
me, and I noticed it happened to others too, is, you start a new job, everything's new. You're brand new, you're learning, you're constantly, you're trying to figure this out. It could be a new business, whatever it is. But eventually, hopefully, if you succeed, you start to get comfortable, you get good at it, and you need new challenges to find. And if you can't find those challenges within work, you start looking abroad. You start going to the gym a lot. You start like really worrying about your lawn or something. You just, let me go make new friends or get a new hobby. And so, because you need to be growing. And that's what happened to me. I need to do it. And so now what I realized is I need to channel that. I do need to always be thinking about, okay, what is the next thing? And so, now I have picked some new avenues that I'm trying to go down. I'm trying to, I was a lot more of a, call it an executor. So I would kind of make a deal happen, but I was a lot less relationship focused. And so
Mm.
now a big part of my role is building relationships and really trying to build these relationships where people will then trust me with their business to sell it and hire me and become a client of mine, which is a new challenge and it's hard. And I'm fairly young to have someone actually do that and be comfortable with
Sure.
it. And so, to me, that's my new challenge, but it's controlled. I understand it. I get that. I had to kind of go through though, all this stuff to really
Right.
figure out that that's what I needed. So
Well, I think that's so insightful, right? We often do need to go through things, try things out, and trying different jackets to see what fits or what doesn't fit. And then what I love too about your story is the ability to pivot and say, you know what? Okay, this isn't working out. Obviously, COVID, but who knows? It could have been something else that was down the line too that you now saw. Okay, well, where was I not, like you said, didn't have a goal? And the last thing, now I got to re-engage in my business and find those new goals, find those new ways where I can actually feel satisfied. What is your big goal now?
My big goal is around like it's really helping businesses, helping companies, but building up a reputation and a repertoire around that. And I'm just what's interesting though is I can't even really conceptualize the full goal because I'm so early into it. So it's really like, yeah, I just want to meet a new company and have an impact. I think that is what I've always liked. It's even with the food business that I started, what I sort of wanted to do. I don't necessarily need or feel like I need to be there every day helping a business or helping a company, but I've got a ton of advice and a lot of experience helping with certain advice at certain times. And so I'm trying to put myself in situations where I can do that, where I can help a young entrepreneur, where I can help someone who is sort of struggling with anything, honestly, as it relates to business and career and everything. So that is why I do have the podcast is trying to touch people in that regard, because it is a hard thing to ask for and you don't even necessarily recognize it. It's a weird thing to say like, hey, things are going really well at my job. I'm miserable. Like that's just not a common thing that you're open and want to admit or say or can even really ask for help about. So me being able to see that, to be that advice, to hopefully provide some perspective, I think is my new goal. But it's not fully formed. Like I try to keep them short. We're at like 6 months and increments, and I can pivot to a slightly different goal. So
well, that's what I was thinking too when you were saying that, was that pivot idea, right? Continuing the pivot idea.
yeah.
So do you have a specific type of company that you're more focused on now that you maybe wouldn't have thought about before you went through what you did?
Company in terms of who I help or who I
Like
target.
client, yeah, sorry, client, yeah, client.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I do a lot of the food world, just
Oh,
nature of it. I had that in the past. I do now. So food in the consumer world. So that's probably my like specialty. But I honestly work across, and you can apply a lot of the same M&A concepts to a lot of others. And I do just am fascinated by companies in a different industry that I don't know and learning about them. So I am trying to and generally open to learning and trying to apply myself in any business. But certainly food I like very naturally I understand it. I think I have a unique perspective on it because I've like actually worked as a more of an operator and founder in
sure.
that world. So
There you go. There's one of those benefits of maybe something that you try that doesn't work out, but you gain the knowledge from that thing, right? So that's very important. Let's talk a little bit about the podcast and how that came about and what is kind of your point of doing that. You mentioned a few little things there. I'd love to kind of dive deeper into that.
yeah, so it's called Lifetime at Work. I interview business people, professionals, honestly, but of varying professions is the idea. And we talk about the concept of work effectively. And I typically get into the background of the person, but trying to figure out like what drives them, what has work taught them about themselves. And honestly, the rationale and the reason for me starting the podcast in the first place was this idea that we spend a lifetime, we spend so long, we spend so much time at work, and many people just hate it, or they tell us they hate it.
Crazy,
They're super excited when Friday comes and miserable when Monday comes, and I'm like, no, I don't think that has to be it. I actually think that you get a lot of fulfillment out of work if you're in the right mindset, if you can have the right perspective on it. And so I want to instill that upon people. But I'm also fascinated by this idea that people might not be happy or that they have ulterior interests and motives within their world of work. So that's what I am trying to understand with each interview is getting at that and understanding, hey, what drives you? What do you like about your job? What do you dislike? What are your goals? That type of stuff.
So if you think back to the podcast, I'm very curious about this then, for the guests that you've had at your podcast, could you just off the top of your head, I know we didn't plan this at a time, but what are like 2 or 3 common denominators, common factors that you see with people who are actually fulfilled in their work and in their job?
What are they? So a ton of people have done more than one thing. So they have pivoted at some point.
Yep.
It is very common. I tend to notice it, and it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be like I'm a I was an investment banker and then I'm an artist of some sort.
Right.
Like that isn't, but it's doing one thing and then realizing and doing another. I think that's, incredibly common. The one thing that I've recognized with myself as well is the people component, though, the building of relationships component. I find that people who don't have that can definitely struggle because you're just lonely, I think. And
Yeah.
part of us working and as people, we are trying to connect. And if you can't necessarily do that unless you have a network of some sort. So, I definitely do find that where people who have again, have a network is good. But it's interesting. Like I get a lot of people who are trying to be on the podcast who just email and say that they want to be on it. And it's those people, they're just, I guess they're happy and they want everyone to know it. Like they're very outward about it, and they're trying to broadcast, hey, here, I found this secret. And in a lot of ways, it's the same stuff. Like it's goals, it's understanding what you're trying to do. It's enjoying what you're doing, enjoying the people you're around. It's being challenged. So, a lot of those are very common themes that a lot of people like. And, you can't be too afraid, I think, of failing, of something different, because, that's important too.
I totally agree. And I think it's interesting finding that fulfillment in your work, the different ways that we all go about doing so. But that relationship piece is so crucial. And it almost seems like, well, duh, this is common knowledge when it comes to that relationship capital. But it is surprising to find so many people who don't invest in that relationship capital, who don't try to figure out how they can more improve the relationships around them, realizing that's probably where they're going to find their next opportunity, their next investment, their next friend, right? So that's really, really important. How long have you been doing your podcast?
Uh, I don't know, a couple years. I'm
Oh,
about
nice.
60 episodes in or
Oh,
so. So
cool.
yeah,
Very good.
yeah,
Yeah. So I love that mine too. It's more like a hobby, almost a service to put stuff out in the world. I don't monetize this. I just want to put the
same.
information out in the world to connect with people and to let them know, hey, you're not alone, right?
Right.
We're out there doing that. Any favorite guests or stories that you can remember? Not, I know they're all your favorite kids, but any favorite guests or stories that you can remember of the show?
Yeah, like I mean, one of the ones that I just can't remember is that I have a friend from I guess high school, and he's a cardiologist, and it was funny. I had never really gone through the story of why did you become a cardiologist. I hang out with him all the time, but it wasn't until the podcast where I actually got to do that, and
We
it's
finally
one of
found.
this,
Oh,
yeah, all these questions, and so it's an interesting thing. I mean, I wouldn't otherwise have a chance to do that. So that was a good one. There was an Olympic figure skater who I interviewed as well, and he had a lot of cool stories. Just because he was, sort of one of those, hey, I have to pivot my career. Like I
yeah.
only have, and all athletes are sort of like that, but here's what you do, and then what do you do? Another interesting one was a musician. It was a guy who was just like, he was actually pretty good, and he's like, you know what, he went to business school with me, but decided that he was going to become a rock star for a year or two, and just that journey. He's now a mortgage broker, but to see that
Obviously,
dichotomy,
that's where you would go from rock star to mortgage broker. That makes total
and
sense.
like and he just the way he's very rational about how he decided, and it you see it in the movies in one way, and then you hear it in real life in this other way, and you're like, yeah, there's an appreciation for it when you understand the real life version of it, which kind of makes a lot of sense. There can only be so many rock stars, and so he went, and you can get to a certain point, but eventually, as he says, you just get tired of playing, Oasis Wonderwall at the next bar because no one wants to hear your song. They want to hear and you're just like, can I just go be a mortgage broker already? So that was a good one too.
So
Yeah.
true. Wow. Well, I love that you mentioned the athletes thing. I interviewed a gentleman on the show who he was a up and coming hockey player. His
Okay.
brother actually got further than he did, but it came to that point after college or during college where he's like, yeah, this ain't going to be a career. So what do I do? And so now he takes athletes and military vets and takes them through a sales school of how to be a salesperson, how to sell, whether it be corporate or medical tech, whether it be cars or whatever, but he helps them find and pivot a new career because so many of them never thought about that before, especially
Yeah.
if they're continually climbing the ranks of those things. Being an Olympian, I mean, yeah, it's kind of like, what do you do after that?
Yeah,
The
and
peak.
there's weird pressure, right? You're doing this, or what are you doing now? You're so good at stuff, and
Right,
like it's
right.
like no, but I'm a regular person as well that needs to figure out my life past this because I spent all my time training. So
Right. Yeah. And I mean, with those with people like that, they're gonna have a ton of discipline and focus and be able to get stuff and goals and all that. That's great. Okay, let's pivot over to Origin Merchant and that company and what you're doing there. We're going back now to basically the venture capital side of things. So now that you've pivoted a little bit and you have kind of a new, if you would, avatar, can you explain to us a little bit of who do you feel like is the ideal avatar to talk to you, to have that opening, like you said earlier, opening conversation? Doesn't mean you have to sell tomorrow, but you opening conversation.
yeah, any business owner, frankly, can provide a lot of value from an advisor like us. I think it's a for our business, it's a long like we typically get paid if you're raising capital or if you are selling your business, and you don't do that often. So a lot of times it's a s- a slow relationship to learn how you can do that sort of stuff. But the ideal person is someone who is understands that they can use some outside help, that even getting perspectives from someone else can be helpful, and that developing a relationship with someone that you ultimately are then later going to use or need is important. And so that's part of it. I mean, really, it's if you can think of it in we have Bay Street, which is our Wall Street, and it's kind of you as a business owner are sort of off doing your thing for so long, and
Yeah.
that's what when this is what we do. And so we're very good at connecting, and that's what I try to do now. I'm connecting people who are out in the industry doing things, making great businesses, to the capital and the companies who ultimately want to buy them when they've decided to exit. And so we're sort of we sit there in the middle and
The
bringing people
matchmakers.
together. It's very relationship focused. I mean, you've got to be out there, and for me, that's a new skill. I really felt myself as a very like introverted, quiet person when I was younger, and I've been working on trying to be less. But as you become this, it's again an interesting challenge to now say, hey, I'm trying to sell a business, and I need to go and make connections, and I need to go pitch myself and do some of that sales. So it does take a lot of facets. But yes, and honestly, anyone, I focus more so in the food world, but honestly, any business, our firm is we have different people who focus on different industries. So
Right.
once we have someone who sort of comes to us and says, hey, I'm love to talk to someone, we should figure out who the right person is that's going to know their industry and know their business and be able to help them the best. So that's kind of who we are.
Well, okay, so let's talk about the people who are out there going like, well, I mean, do I really need a broker? Can I just like put this out on, Biz by Sell and sell my own business myself? I don't know if you have that in Canada. Do you have Biz by Sell in
We
Canada?
have yes,
It's basically, yeah, just
yeah.
a what's it called? A marketplace for businesses that are for sale. But obviously, you've seen some pretty interesting stories throughout the years. Getting help from somebody like you, like a broker, versus I'll just figure it out myself, or I'll come to you when I'm at the end or I'm ready to do it. Like, because of course, the I don't know if I want to call it the greedy part of us, but it's like, well, why would I pay you? That's going to be less money in my pocket, type thing. So why would people choose to go with somebody like you versus doing it on their own?
Yeah, there's a few ways to think about it. I would say that if you've got a very standard commoditized business, like I don't know, there's so many businesses like you, and there's nothing overly unique. I don't know. I'm just gonna throw out there like a hair salon that's very standard. Then yeah,
Okay.
a biz buy sell may just be what you need because there's a lot of benchmarks. It's pretty standardized. A lot of businesses aren't like that though. They are incredibly unique. They require a deep understanding and of the actual business to be able to sell it to someone and figure out who the right buyer is. And so that's where we, I think, can provide and do provide the most value. The other thing is, the person you're going to be selling to in your business is likely very sophisticated. Is one thing if you're going to sell your business to someone in your community or neighbor, but chances are you're selling to a big corporation, private equity, whatever. Those people that are negotiating, that are like, they do deals. That's what they do. Like
This
that's their
is their
life, and so
living,
they're very
right?
good at
Yeah.
it. And so having someone, an advisor, in there to be able to help you negotiate, to understand what's driving value, how do you negotiate, and how do you maneuver certain things, how do you position the business the best, etc. It gets you so much more value than what you have to pay us that it just becomes worth it. And the other thing is, just by virtue of having a process, I mean, you can go, and some people do, they just they've been in business for a long time, and someone has come by their door and said, hey, if you're ever interested in selling, give me a call. And you can call that person and sell your business, but you're probably not going to get the best value, you're probably not going to get the best deal. Like, you, by actually running a process and having someone there to manage it, you know that you've actually found the best buyer. Because frankly, like in any reasonably good, like even if you're the best business, there's not that many buyers. Like, there aren't hundreds of buyers of your business per se. You can ask hundreds of people and hundreds of companies, but there are probably only a few really good buyers out there that and you need to find them. And that can be hard, especially when that's not what you do. You're not in that world all the time. You're only selling your business once. So
Do you have I mentioned earlier at the very beginning, I love stories. I love how they connect us together. Do you have one of your favorite stories of a business that you're able to help, who maybe didn't think they were going to be able to get as much as evaluation, or they were in a tough spot and you're able to help them find the perfect buyer?
yeah, it's hard. No one likes telling stories, so I always got to be a bit cagey about it when it's a particular business. I mean, we do it a lot. Where there's certainly situations where I think just I would say that a business doesn't necessarily know what they're getting themselves into, and they don't. And so we can certainly be helpful in showing them that that's usually what happens. Most people know if they've got a really good business that people want, because by this day and age, like, it's people are emailing you and it's easy enough to find. So it's less that, it's probably more so the work that goes into actually creating it. But if I think of sort of memorable stories, it's typically, I would honestly say earlier in my career, where there's just, crazy instances. I remember there was one where there was a hostile actually situation where there was a company that came out, they put out a bid, it was public, they said, here's what we're going to pay. And I swear every week there was it went up 5 or 6 times, where another company would come in and they would bid you, and it was very interesting. Wow. I'd wake up in the morning and be like, oh, another one. There was another instance where there was a company that was it went public, and the management team wanted to buy the company back. They didn't like being public anymore, and they wanted to buy the public company. And there's a lot of securities rules that come about when that happens. And so we were hired to effectively find someone else to buy the business. And if you can think about, adversarial nature of this, so what we were trying to do was sell this founder his business out from under him when he wanted to buy it. And I was a young person there helping, and just being yelled at, like, just like, and I didn't even know what was going on really, and fully appreciate it because I'm only a year or two in. But it was a very intense moment, or definitely intense moments through that. But it was just a very eye-opening junior person. Seeing what that's like. So
I saw that happen a couple of times on Suits. So yeah, I know.
People you hate, and when you actually hate someone, and you like, why are you doing this to me? And you're like, just doing my job. I just started here. Like,
oh my goodness, it's so funny. Wow, man. Well, that's you have a fascinating job. I'm sure you see a lot of fascinating things and get to interact with a lot of interesting businesses as well. The last question before we get to the final questions is, you mentioned you're in Canada. Do you work in US too, or is it just strictly Canada based?
We have about 8 people. We are about 50 people. Our company, and we work with a lot of, call it smaller businesses. So we would be, we have about 8 people in the US. It's a big growth area for us. We started in Canada, but we have offices in Montreal and people in Boston, Chicago, Denver as well. So we're slowly growing.
Boston, where all that IT is there. So that's good. The information technology is there. That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and what you do as a unique entrepreneur on our show today. How can people get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is the best way, though I'm Greg Martin, so that it's reasonably common. But if you look at Greg Martin Lifetime at Work, or Greg Martin Origin Merchant Partners, that'll be helpful. But then also the podcast, you can find it anywhere. It's called Lifetime at Work.
Nice. Lifetime at Work or Origin Merchant Partners. Okay. So, Greg, we end our show. And first of all, thank you so much for being a guest. You've really given us a lot to think about and I appreciate hearing your story. We always end our show with 4 questions that I ask everybody based around the role, ROLE part of Own Your Role. And it's just top of mind, right off the top of your head, answers to these 4 questions. Are you willing to play?
All right.
All right.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. Question number 1. It's about your responsibilities. What is the highest and greatest responsibility you have on this earth?
My kids and not screwing them up. I'm really worried about social media and what it's going to do to them. And my oldest is only 8, so I feel like that's the thing I'm focused on the most for some reason.
I totally can get that. I understand that. My kids were too young for that earlier on, and then later on they were the ones that introduced to it. So they were the first generation that didn't have it and then came into it. So yeah.
Anyways, it's sort of I'm not there where I'm struggling with it yet, but I know it's going to happen. So it's a very hot topic here.
I understand. All right. Next question around the O of outcome. What do you want as the ultimate outcome for your life?
I think of it as finding a job or finding a place or finding a group of people that I want to hang out with a lot. I sort of just see that I've had that in the past. I feel like I've sort of lost it, and I think I'm trying to head back to going in that area. So I think
Love that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Next question is around the L, which is leadership. What do you consider true leadership to be?
Leadership is a funny one. It's this combination of telling people what to do, but also including them in making sure that you're not telling them what to do. So it's taking the reins, though, in some cases where people know and people need it. So it morphs. It's different in many ways, but I realize that there's so many facets of it. I think you're ultimately trying to be the person that everyone else around you or that needs you to be, is how I think about it.
Yeah, that's great. Last question is around your experience. So truth of the matter is every single one of us will have a final day on this earth, and hopefully it's years and years and years from now. But between now and then, what experience do you hope or want to have between now and dead?
I've thought about this and said it's writing a book, which I've not done before. It doesn't sound interesting enough, though, the way you said that and framed that to me. Now that I feel like it should be some sort of crazy travel or something like that. But that is what I live in Canada. I've always wanted to live for 2 or 3 or 4 months. Not for that in a warm climate. I've never done it, so I feel like that would be an easier one. So maybe I'll do that and write a book.
Go live in a warm climate for 4 months while you're writing the book.
Right. Exactly.
It's a great idea. Awesome. Hey, there are no expected answers. The point is that whatever is off the top of your head, what you're thinking about. And the goal too is for you to think of it as we end our show, which we're about to do. Thank you so much, Greg, for being a part of the show and sharing your message and your story. I know it edified me and what I was able to learn from you, and I'm sure it did for our listeners as well. Thanks you so much.
It was great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you again for listening to the Own Your Role podcast. Please make sure that you like and subscribe to the show, and make sure you get that notification button if you're watching on YouTube, as well as share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you know of somebody that you think is a unique entrepreneur, make sure you reach out to us and let us know so we can interview them on the show as well. See you next time on the Own Your Role podcast, everybody.